The current case for $1 billion in fraud. That's a lot of money. What is this $1 billion in fraud that they're talking about? So I started looking into the fraud case. The fraud case itself is very strange. Here's the typical life cycle of a fraud case. There is some deception of a business person against investors. This is the fraud. Then the fraud usually leads to a business failure. Either a business goes bankrupt or financial promises are not kept. Then investors lose their money and get upset. The investors complain to the SEC or the FBI, who make an arrest. Most fraud cases follow this pattern. A good example of this is the FTX fraud case. We all know the story. FTX recently declared bankruptcy. Millions of people have lost their money. People were furious, and they went to the SEC and said, "You better do something about this." The head of the company, Sam Bankman-Fried, was arrested for fraud. It is very strange that Miles Guo's case does not follow the same pattern. First, Miles Guo's businesses were not failing. The only reason the businesses were shut down is because the SEC came in and froze all of his assets. The SEC shut the businesses down. Second, there are no angry investors. This is very odd. When you research fraud cases, it's usually very easy to find angry investors. They're usually out there screaming at the top of their lungs. In this case, I could not find any. So I started looking. I did a test on Twitter. 1 week ago, I posted a thread on Twitter about Miles Guo's case. I received a flood of messages from investors, a lot. But these investors were not angry with Miles Guo. They were telling me that Miles Guo was innocent, and they were begging for the US government to stop oppressing them. In fact, these investors are attending protests in support of Miles Guo. This really took me by surprise. This is very strange behavior by investors in a fraud case. Do you know how many messages I received from investors who were angry with Miles Guo? 0. Not a single one. Just to put this in perspective, compare this to FTX. There are so many angry FTX investors. When I tweet about FTX, I get a string of angry responses. You probably cannot walk down the street and throw a rock without hitting an angry FTX investor.